Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and members of the committee, good morning as well. I'm Senator David Waters, District 4, to introduce Senate Bill 14 relative to the use of game cameras. I will very briefly present what the actual parts of the legislation are as amended by the House, and then talk a little bit about some of the background of the bill, and then we have lots of folks here from Fish and Game and Timberland Association, Owners Association, and others as well. What this bill tries to get at is the balancing of the use of game cameras and privacy rights. And so the work that has been done in the Senate and in the House, I think we're into 5 or 6 years working on this since the technology has arisen, and have tried and gotten kind of close in many bills. And I think we thought we got pretty good job done in the Senate, and I think the bill's been improved in the House as well. So what you have here are some definitions of what a game camera is and the technology that's involved with it, and then the provisions about when they are able to be used for hunting per animal or fur-bearing animal, how they can locate them, use them, and then restrictions on how soon after they've taken an image that they can go out and do their hunt, which makes some good sense there. And then it turns to the property owner rights, and it talks about getting permission. We went back and forth a lot about how the commission be given, did it be given, so on and so forth. And so now we have the language here about getting the permission, or someone can post their land to say that the use is permitted on these lands. Then, as we have with tree stands and other things, there's a date by which they ought to be removed every year, unless the owner has explicitly allowed it to stay on past the December 31st. And then, since the game cameras are actually the property of the person who places it, and if somebody sees one and says, I don't want that camera in my tree, and takes it out, they're actually removing or damaging potentially somebody's property. So that's why the procedure needs to be in here, that that someone who is able to take that camera down can be informed to come out and take it out of the woods for the property owner. And then you see some provisions here for use of them in research, and then for law enforcement activities as well. So that's what the bill tries to do. But let me go back a little bit to the kind of balancing of issues here. And as I think back, Representative Lynn, to common law, and to, Robin Hood didn't have game cameras, but he was sure concerned about open access of public lands, and that is so deeply rooted in common law and our traditions in this state. And so how do we balance out the rights of public access to land with the rights of the property owners to privacy and to regulate what goes on their land? Now, what makes this such an important issue is that we need to get this right, because as they are being used, and as the technology, of course, improves and increases, people are concerned about their privacy. And if we don't provide a system here that works for private land owners, they are going to post their land just to no trespassing and no hunting. And for those of us, I was on Fish and Game when I was in the House, and now Energy and Natural Resources. If we're going to make sure that hunting can continue in our state, we have to make sure that this good balance is there, so that people will keep their land open. And the worst result would be for large landowners, particularly coming in from out of state, buying large amounts of land and not familiar with the culture of open access and hunting, will just by default post all their property. And there's some of that going on. So this is why, landowners, Timberland Owners Association, Fish and Game have worked so hard over many years now, and why they asked me to bring this bill forward in the Senate. So very glad to answer some questions, but we have a lot of people who also want to talk about it as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Any questions for Senator Waters? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Waters, someone else.
Yes.
Oh, thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. And thank you for
Yes,
your
for our
testimony,
pleasure.
Senator Waters. I just have a question about section, let's see, where is it? Section 1,
Uh-huh.
and the requirement that no person shall take the game animal or fur-bearing animal within the same calendar day of remotely viewing that image. How is that enforced, or what's the expectation for, I mean, I get the rationale for it, but how would you ensure that that doesn't happen?
Well, I'm going to let the Fish and Game folks speak to that, but there is some enforcement around that, and that's something that has been a concern, and questions a fair hunt. And I think that again, I'm going to let Fish and Game, but I do believe we have some provisions that are similar to this relating to the issue of baiting as well. So I'll let them speak to that.
Okay,
the
thank you.
enforcement side.
And Representative Murphy, just based on my knowledge, the camera will actually put a date timestamp when it sends
Yeah.
a picture, as well as the cell phone itself will show when it came in. So it is absolutely provable when it was sent and when it was received. And if they happen to be there when you harvest it, they can put it together. It's a matter of some math and looking at the two devices. But I'm sure they'll expound on that. when
Thank
they
you, Mr.
testify.
Chairman.
Yeah. With that, the chair recognizes Ann and Mark Davis.
I have written testimony. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Senate Bill 14. Mark and I are the owners of 500 acres next to the Guile State Forest. Our land is not posted. We have been named the New Hampshire Tree Farm of the Year for 2022 in recognition of our significant wildlife habitat management. We've had 5 moose taken on the property since 2004. We facilitate hunters on our property. We have allowed game cameras to be used in 2 instances with written permission, and we knew exactly where the cameras were. But we do not want to have people come onto our property without permission and place game cameras, or tree stands for that matter, on our property without knowing where they are. We have 10 miles of trails that are managed and are used frequently by the public. And we feel that it would be an invasion of our privacy and of the other folks who use our land if a game camera were set up anywhere near these trails. Our other concern is that we actively manage our property. We've had 4 timber harvests since 2004. We are planning a timber harvest this year or next year. That's always dependent on ground conditions. And so if there were game cameras on the property or tree stands on the property and we didn't know where they were, then they could be taken down with the timber harvest or damaged, and we would prefer not to have that happen to the owners of that equipment. Welcome any questions, but we know we're supposed to keep our comments short, so.
While I appreciate pithiness, if there's anything else you want to add, go ahead.
I just had one real quick thing. We retired to New Hampshire 20 years ago or so. And one of the reasons we did, one of the big reasons we did is because we were so pleased that we could meet in a situation like this. Came from Chicago where you had to put $100 on the table just to get the
To talk to your
to talk to your alderman. So
That's our whole year's salary.
Yes, we know that.
we know that, but I just want to say that and I don't want to get too excited, but it's my land, Ann's land, and one of the nice things about New Hampshire is your land is your land, and it isn't belong to somebody else, and you can't be told without the common law. I heard the word common law, which is true and good, but it's my land.
Yeah. We love having people use our property, including hunters. We've had wonderful relationships with the hunters who have used our property. We have found them to be knowledgeable, respectful, and that's probably 99% of the folks who come onto our land. One of the reasons that we bought the land next to the Guile State Forest was to enhance the opportunities for the public to use this land in perpetuity. And we have taken the expense and the steps to place a conservation easement on the property to ensure that it will not become a Walmart parking lot or a housing development. And it is, we're prejudiced, but we think it's a beautiful piece of land. And one of the other things that we've done, we know that our management has benefited wildlife, but this year through 2026, we have hired wildlife biologists to survey the animals and plants on the property before a timber harvest and then after a timber harvest to determine whether in fact our timber management is beneficial to the plant and animal species on the land. So we're serious about providing this as a public resource and documenting it and sharing that information with others who might find it beneficial. But we do feel strongly about knowing if people have game cameras on our land.
Thank you for your testimony and your sharing of your property. If I may ask, if these two bills pass, is it your intention to continue on allowing your property to be shared in the way that you have?
Our conservation easement requires that the land be continued to be open to hunting. However, we will put up signs that say written permission is required for tree stands and game cameras. That would be within the provisions of our conservation easement.
Any further questions for these witnesses? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, the chair recognizes Sheila and Tom Thompson.
Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Sheila Thompson, and this is my husband, Tom. I'm here to ask you to pass the game camera bill, Senate Bill 14. I own several parcels of land in Orford and Wentworth, New Hampshire. During good weather, I'm often out on the properties for several hours hiking around with either a friend or my family, and that might include my granddaughter and grandson. One of the issues that I would like to raise is that I don't want to worry about where there might be a camera when I or one of my grandchildren or friends needs to take a bathroom break. That's not a time when we should have to worry about where the cameras are located. Please think about my privacy. I own the property. The landowner needs to be asked so that we know where any cameras are located. Please pass this bill. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for having both Sheila and myself here to testify on this bill. Actually, the letter that I presented has both bills in it, so I'd like to share that letter with you and read it into the minutes. Mr. Chairman and committee members, my name is Tom Thompson, owner of the Thompson Family Tree Farm, with my wife Sheila. We own 2,400 acres in Orford and Wentworth and manage it as a sustainable forest. I have owned forest land for over 66 years and have been an advocate for many years of opening and sharing our forest land with both the state of New Hampshire and the general public. We have over 12 miles of wood roads and skid trails that we allow the snowmobile clubs to use. We open our land for many other activities for foot traffic, such as hunting, hiking, photography, birding, annual butterfly count, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, along with many tours that we give each year. I support Senate Bill 14 relative to the use of game cameras and Senate Bill 15 relative to the use of tree stands and observation blinds, as written in these bills, and recently both bills were passed by the full House and Senate. This is a privacy issue for our family. As a forest landowner and tree farmer, I can tell you many other tree farmers throughout New Hampshire feel the same as we do. We have many special spots on our property that we have family gatherings or tours. And last thing we need to worry about is someone that has placed a camera without permission and has the latest technology and plays it back in real time on a cell phone, which can be put on social media within minutes. We as landowners should not have to worry about what we are doing and saying on our own property. I watched the latest video of the hearing on April 4th on these two Senate bills in Fish and Game and Marine Resource Committee, and was shocked when I heard a member of this committee say, and I'm paraphrasing, that no landowner should have the expectations of privacy on his land. It's this kind of statement from a public official that will drive private landowners to post their lands throughout New Hampshire. As a landowner who has purchased my first woodlot, 125 acres, when I was 11 years old, and for the last 66 years, I have shared that woodlot and many other woodlots over the years. I have enjoyed the many folks who have given us the courtesy of asking permission to hunt, place game cameras and deer stands on our property, and we also appreciate the many calls and cards thanking us for sharing our lands. It's this kind of attitude that will keep New Hampshire private lands open. As of today, I have testified 4 times this year in support of these bills, as written and passed by the Senate and recently by the full House. But for some reason, it has been referred to Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. Please pass the bills as they were passed by the full House. If these bills fail to pass and do not become law to protect the privacy of our private lands, our 2,400 acres will be posted for the first time in 66 years. I can assure you many more thousands of acres in New Hampshire will also be posted because the New Hampshire legislature ignored the privacy rights of our New Hampshire landowners, who in the past have been willing to share our lands with the general public in the state of New Hampshire. Thank you for your time and consideration on this important issue for all New Hampshire private forest landowners who own 72% of the 4.7 million acres of forest land in New Hampshire. One other thing I would like to add is the New Hampshire major landowner organizations, New Hampshire Timberlanders, New Hampshire Farm Bureau, Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests, which we are members of, are here today to support both bills. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. Just for clarification, it was referred to this committee because it does provide a penalty, and anytime a bill provides a penalty by law, the Criminal Justice Committee hears it because it's a criminal justice issue. That's the only reason that it was referred to this committee. Does anyone else have questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. At this point, the chair recognizes Susan Price from New Hampshire Fish and Game.
My name is Susan Price. I'm the Carroll County Fish and Game Commissioner, and I'm also chair of the Legislative Committee for the Commission. Thank you, Chairman Roy and members of the committee, listening and taking this bill very seriously. I normally come and sort of wing it, so to speak. But this is not only a very important issue for the landowners who have spoken, but Fish and Game, the commission, providing public access is actually one of our duties charged to us under RSA 2064A. And the key to both the creation of the commission is that we are the citizen representatives. And under item 3, one of our duties is to ensure public access to private land for recreational use. It's not for hunting use, it's not for fishing use, trapping, it's for all recreational use. So we want to stress that this is not just about hunters using game access to public land private land for the public. So we take this so seriously that we actually have a program at the department that is dedicated to landowner relations. We provide signs, we provide personnel to go out to talk to people that have large tracts of land. Commissioners reach out. I've done this recently in Carroll County, where we had some people, such as the senator spoke of, that moved in and immediately posted 200 acres of land that had never been posted in the town before. And I was able to speak with them and get it unposted. So we take these relationships with the private landowner very seriously at Fish and Game. I don't believe anyone has spoken of the percentage of private land in the state, but it's at the 76% level. So for us to provide public access, maintaining these landowner relationships and respecting private property rights are very important. And this does bring in the constitutional right under Article 2B of the New Hampshire Constitution to a right to privacy. Nowhere in our Constitution is a guaranteed of public access to private land to which you have no legal standing to be on. This is about the generosity of private landowners. You've heard prior testimony from two couples. And we just have worked very hard on this bill the last several years with the stakeholders. And we feel like we've gotten it right this time. And we would very much appreciate criminal justice's support. And this can move to the governor's desk. I'll be glad to take any questions you may have.
Yeah, I just have one question on Section 4, Roman numeral 4 of the proposed bill. It says a property owner shall contact a local or state law enforcement officer or conservation officer to remove and seize a game camera which was placed in violation of this section. Is it your understanding that that means that's what you have to do? In other words, if I own land and somebody has, without my permission, posted a game camera, do I have to call Fish and Game, or can I just go out and take the camera down?
I'm going to defer to the colonel when he comes up, because he deals with this and the officers deal with this all the time. And Senator Waters spoke to this in his initial testimony. Some of these game cams are attached to trees with cables. So there is an issue of damaging someone's property that's been placed on your property. And so to minimize that conflict, most landowners will currently call the department for assistance, but I'll defer to the colonel on more pragmatic matters with that situation.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony and
Thank
time.
you.
This time the chair recognizes Jeff Eames or Fames, I can't. Eames, all right.
Well, good morning. For the record, my name is Jeff Eames. I'm a resident of Epsom, New Hampshire. I grew up in Deerfield, New Hampshire. We own a business called Fort Mountain Land and Timber, Fort Mountain Trucking. And our business is primarily forest management, harvesting timber, road building, working with landowners across the state of New Hampshire. We work with landowners about 30,000 acres right around here. Some of our clients include Pembroke Waterworks, Manchester Waterworks, the Whittemore family, the Mathis family in Deerfield, and myself and my wife own 1,000 acres of land in Epsom, Allenstown, and Deerfield. I encourage you to visit our website if you have a chance. It's called NewHampshireForestry.com. It'll give you a real good idea of what and how we do things. I'm here to ask the committee to pass the bill as the House and Senate have written it. And why? I'm in the forestry business. Every day we have employees, which is 13, go into the woods except for the truck drivers. Every day we find a different camera, a different tree stand, and we got to remove those. We just can't work in an environment with tree stands and cameras. And we somewhat feel a certain responsibility to contact that person who owns it, to give it to them. The Landowner Assistance Program has done things like taking pictures of cameras and put them on Facebook to find a rightful owner, and it becomes a horror show. All the dialogue that goes on with that Facebook stuff, whether it's login, whether it's, changing of the land, it's not fun. And all we'd like to do is return that product to its rightful owner. State of Michigan concludes that 47% of hunters today use game cameras. You take that factor and put it in New Hampshire, that's over 50,000 cameras out there. Every day, like I said, myself and the forestry team are in the woods making decisions, helping landowners manage their property. I got involved with this business 40 years ago. Since then, the clients that we have changed. Their property is not just a woodlot anymore. They take a lot of pride in ownership. They practice all kinds of different diverse management, whether it's wildlife management, whether it's water quality, whether it's forestry, whether it's recreation, and we've adapted to change with them. But however, it's not just a woodlot anymore. It's someone's personal property, and I can tell you that they get very offended when they find game cameras and tree stands on their property. And one of the first things that they do is they post the property. Dealing with game cameras, it's a problem. Personally, I've been threatened. Okay, I'm on a job. Someone shows up and says, hey, you took my tree stand, you took my camera. I didn't take it. Yeah, you better watch your back, Eames. Your equipment's going to burn. What? This morning I met with Scott Rolfe. He's a forester managing land for the state of New Hampshire, the regional manager. And I said, what do you think about this? Oh, man. He says, you know how much time I spend on trying to find the owners of these things? I guess as a taxpayer, do I really want someone interrupting his daily activities to go find the owner of tree stands and game cameras? Landowners like Manchester Waterworks are so frustrated with it that they have come up with their own policy, and I encourage you, if I can leave this with you. It is hunting permit required. They own about 8,000 acres right around Manchester, New Hampshire. That's a big land base for recreational, for our biggest component of Manchester and the vicinity. They're so frustrated with it that they came up with their own policy regarding tree stands. Nothing to do with game cameras. So I'd like to introduce this. I've only brought one copy for the board, for their committee to review. And I guess with that in mind, I feel a lot more comfortable when being in the woods than I do in this committee. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Go ahead, Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for coming in and talking to us today. I just wanted to ask really quickly, especially in the event that someone is trying to return the property, the landowner finds something and wants to return it. This bill provides for obviously having the information, providing for permission and things like that. Is it your contention that, as the representative mentioned before, that having Fish and Game, so contacting a local or state law enforcement officer or conservation officer would reduce the risk of having that interaction like you were describing where it was contentious and trouble between the landowner and the owner of the property.
Yeah, absolutely. If there was some chain of custody to what that was going on out there, it would eliminate the negative activity or actions of the tree stand owner or the game camera owner.
Thank you.
And
See-
Mr. Chairman, can I give this to you?
Yes, actually, if you, on the way out, if you could hand it to our assistant, this shall make copies for the whole committee.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, the chair recognizes Walter Lacey.
I've discovered in the last few months I have a real hearing problem in a situation like this, so thank you for your patience. I am Walter Lacey from Keene, and my wife and I own 650 acres of land in Keene, Swansea, and Chesterfield. Although not a hunter myself, I believe very strongly in traditional uses of the land, and hunting is certainly one of them. Our land has always been open to hunting and trapping. I can't imagine that changing. That being said, I've had a problem with tree stands over the years, twice with associated game cameras. In 2 instances, healthy, valuable oak trees were damaged. None of the stands or cameras had contact information on them, and all my efforts to communicate with the owners by leaving my contact information on flagging tape was unsuccessful. In the most recent incident, because of the nature of the camera involved, a Fish and Game officer was able to identify the offender. The mutual benefits of having contact information on this equipment seem undeniable. A simple phone call could clear up any question a landowner might have, and a hunter might get back a misplaced stand or camera. The increasing use and sophistication of game cameras should require permission for their use on private land. The idea that something is allowed in my backyard, but not yours, is unacceptable. It all seems to me a matter of common courtesy. If you want to leave a piece of gear on someone else's land, you get permission, put your name on it. What could be simpler than that? I don't like to see land posted. I think it's a short-sighted measure. If the common sense requirements of SB 14 and 15 are not enacted, however, I'm afraid landowners may be left with no other choice. With privileges come some responsibilities. And I have to add, one of the greatest rewards of owning land is being able to share it. So I hope we can get these issues cleared up. Thank you.
Any questions for the witness?
Sorry.
Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Chair recognizes Mark Ledgard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I submitted by email a letter to the chair on, I guess it was Sunday evening, May 14th. So that letter, I'll just kind of read a few things from it. For the record, I'm Mark Ledgard. I've lived here in New Hampshire nearly all my life, hunted here all my life since my father gave me a BB gun to start hunting with. I'm a certified New Hampshire Fish and Game hunter, safety instructor. I'm representing myself as a private landowner. I own 40 acres. I had some land up in northern New Hampshire. Just recently sold that camp as a hunting camp. I also participate in hunter mentoring program. I've hunted people of all ages, men and women. Recently, a 81-year-old hunter last year for a first year, and I got him out there. He got his first deer. Never been hunting his entire life. He also got a 21-pound turkey, better than I have ever gotten. I've been in 35 years environmental compliance. I'm now retired, but I work part-time for the town of Sanborn, New Hampshire, where I live. I'm doing land use planning and regulations, zoning enforcement officer. My wife and I, right now, we own 40 acres in Sanborn, New Hampshire. We have it open to people to hunt, people hiking, whatever they want to do, snowshoeing, horseback riding. We enjoy people utilizing our land. I did have to put up some no hunting without permission because some people went out there and were hunting, left trash, and did some damage to my land. So I don't have anything against anybody hunting because I'm an avid hunter myself. I just want to make sure that when people are on my land, I know what they're doing. So I don't see this bill. I agree with the Senate Bill 14 and 15. I see it actually as protecting our hunting heritage because it's putting the landowner, private landowner, having some say in what they do, which is basically what we want to do. And it's going to preserve our hunting heritage. I've seen a lot of land being posted, as other people have testified today. And here I am trying to mentor some young hunters, older hunters, and the land is getting posted. I'm having a hard time finding places for them to go to and hunt where, you know, they can feel comfortable out there. So I think, and I do talk to landowners when I go to hunt on their property. I generally don't put tree stands out there or cameras, but I do on my own property. But I ask for permission to hunt even if it's not posted. So my wife and I both support these bills as written. And with that, most of that other information is in this letter. I'll open it up to any questions if anybody has.
Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
At this point, the chair calls AJ Hunter.
Good morning. My name is AJ Hunter. I'm here representing myself. I live in Conway, New Hampshire. Thank you for letting me speak on this issue. I'm ignorant to a lot of the stuff that's going on here, and I'll admit that. Also kind of biased as a non-landowner. I'm very grateful to the common law that we have and to the private landowners that do allow us to access their land. I hunt predominantly on public. I do intermix with private that is not posted and private that is posted. I utilize game cameras on public land and the public that is not posted. What I see here is the first step to restrict recreational use of tools on private land. Again, a game camera is used for hunting, trapping, all that stuff. I know photographers who use them to capture pictures of wildlife. There were amendments that were introduced, a 300-foot buffer zone around a dwelling or a building that was taken out in a previous committee. That would have been reasonable to put in there. The other thing that I see when it comes to large tracts of landowners is something that hasn't been brought up here. It's the 20% recreational discount on current use property tax. When I see that, I see a financial and an economic thing. Again, I'm ignorant to stuff, so I ask questions about these things. I do think that it does need to be addressed. I think that, especially with the live action cameras where we can see stuff there, that's it's absurd. There is a right to privacy that people should have. I do question, though, that right to privacy, is that still there when the land is open to the public for recreational use? And posting the property would be making it not open and would really codify that right to privacy. I don't believe that we should be encouraging people to post. I just see these types of things. Asking questions, hoping that you all can maybe pump the brakes on this year, have a little bit more deliberation discussion on what we can do to actually ensure a healthy benefit on both sides. Thank you very much.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. The chair recognizes Representative Judy Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the Criminal Justice Committee. I'll be brief because previous speakers have pretty much touched upon a lot of what I was going to say. But I'm here today to support SB 14. Many of my constituents have contacted me and asked me to come and support this bill. I do support this bill. I support hunting. I support property rights as well. Being able to access private land is a privilege. And as a courtesy, we should ask the owner permission to place cameras on private land. We have to respect property rights. And bottom line, these game cameras, they're surveillance. It's surveillance on private property. And again, you know, if it's your land, you don't want to be walking out on your property somewhere and doing something and be caught on camera unawares. I agree that we want to provide public access to private land. But again, we have to respect that hunting and access to the private land is a privilege. And that property rights and privacy are more important. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Barron. Chair recognizes Dennis McKinney. Thank you, Mr. McKinney. Chair recognizes Robert Johnson. Johnson, I'm sorry, it's very small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Rob Johnson, representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as the Federation's Policy Director, here in support of Senate Bill 14. I have provided you with a handout this morning, a letter of testimony, and I just would like to point out of that letter and stress that any camera placed on private property without the landowner's knowledge of it being placed or the knowledge of who placed it makes it in effect a surveillance device, and we believe it is that simple. And in closing, I just would like to add, and many of our the landowners here who are Farm Bureau members as well have said it very well, that and our membership in general takes great pride in keeping our land open. And I know personally from my family's land, there's nothing better when you're out in the yard, you're working, and somebody stops by and thanks you for a walk they took or wildlife they saw, and that is it's very important I think to most landowners to be able to share their land. But in the end, it is a courtesy that a landowner should have the ability that if they do not want a camera up on a spot or a place or a time, that they should have the ability to say no. And Mr. Chair, and more specifics to what this committee is looking at, the fine schedule, I just wanted to say that we did work on the bill with Fish and Game, and I'll let the Colonel speak to that specifically. But it is something that we do strongly support the bill and ask for you to recommend it as ought to pass, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Chair recognizes Matt Leahy.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Matt Leahy. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forest. We support the bill for really the reasons you've already heard, so I won't repeat those. I did just want to briefly mention our interest in this issue and also just make one additional point. So the Forest Society, we are a private nonprofit land trust and forestry organization, so we own and protect land, and as part of our ownership and management, we do conduct forest management, timber harvest on these lands we own. So, we do view ourselves as part of the network of private landowners in our state. And I'll just make one point about the reason we support the bill. We do view it, we view one of the key benefits is that it will, we think, lead to more and improved interactions between private landowners and, those people who are using their lands, and not just for hunting, but, hiking, bird watching, all that. And we think that's really important. Again, as you've heard, maintaining these traditional uses of our land is very important. That's why, that's one of the reasons why we do protect land. So again, we think, improving those relationships and interactions between landowners and the people who use their land is very important. So again, we support the bill. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. I don't know what the last name is. The chair recognizes Karsten Springs. Is that? Karsten Springer.
With respect, I'd like to wait until after the colonel speaks so that I may not waste the committee's time if he speaks to one of my points.
Okay. Chair recognizes Kyle Baker.
Good morning. My name is Kyle Baker, and I'm here on behalf of the New Hampshire Wildlife Federation. The New Hampshire Wildlife Federation is a statewide nonprofit that represents approximately 50 fish and game clubs and associations made up of the Trappers Association, the Bear Hunters Association, and approximately an affiliated membership of about 50,000 hunters, anglers, and trappers from around the state. We're here to fully support Senate Bill 14. We think that this bill threads the needle in preserving the open access to lands, but allowing and respecting the private landowners and their willingness to continue to allow for hunting and fishing to happen on their land. We've been working with both Farm Bureau, the Timberland Owners, Fish and Game Department for a number of years now on legislation that we think will address the problem, as well as continue to allow and foster an active sporting community in New Hampshire. Game cameras as you heard, are becoming increasingly popular. It wasn't long ago that a game camera was, $200. Now they're $20, and they send the pictures directly to your phone. So they're becoming more popular. They're also an incredible tool when it comes to recruiting new hunters. There's nothing that gets a kid more excited than showing them a picture of a bear or a deer that, passed through the woods behind their house the night before. And it can really help bring people into the sport as well. But that said, there is a privacy concern, and we need to respect the folks that allow us to hunt on their lands. So we're here to support. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to be brief and respect your time this morning.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Bolden.
I'm sorry if this has already been covered. Maybe I missed it, but do game cameras transmit sound?
They do. There are some that have the ability to transmit sound, which is a whole nother level of concern and privacy. But primarily, the average game camera, when I talk about a $20 game camera, they're primarily transmitting pictures and silent video. But there are some that have the ability to transmit.
Thank you. And Representative Bolden, from my understanding, they can record video and sound and keep it on a card on the camera, but for the most part, what's sent is just the pictures because of the memory and data required. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Jason Stock.
Well, good morning. For the record, my name's Jason Stock. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of both 14 and 15. By way of background, our membership totals around 1,200, 1,300 members. They're timberland owners, as well as forest products, businesses, and industry. Our members own or manage about 1 million acres in the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire has as you heard earlier, unlike some of the western states, a lot of the land, particularly in the east, but New Hampshire especially, about 76% of it is privately owned. And we have a great tradition of what we call open access, people being allowed to enter private property to recreate and use that. And that has really spawned a very robust outdoor recreation industry in New Hampshire, to the tune of over $1 billion a year of economic activity. And this is everything from snowmobiling, hiking, nature observation, hunting, fishing. And, you know, for us, when we look at, you know, those are traditional land uses. You heard current use mentioned earlier. And in fact, current use actually provides an incentive to a further incentive to landowners to maintain their property open. And it's the statute RSA 79A4 is pretty specific. It's skiing, snowshoeing, fishing, hunting, hiking, or nature observation. Those are you maintain your property open 12 months of the year. That is in the current use statute. As a landowner, you can receive an additional 20% reduction on your tax assessment. And that was quite intentional. It was intentional to foster and encourage landowners to maintain open space and maintain it for recreation. As you heard earlier, cameras, the game cameras, the prices have come down. The technology has advanced, and many landowners feel that they are truly an invasion of their privacy. I won't reiterate what you've heard earlier. And for us, we feel Senate Bill 14 does a good job at, as the prior speaker said, at threading that needle, not prohibiting the use of game cameras. We're not saying no game cameras, nowhere, no how, don't use them. But we're saying, look, give us the courtesy, ask the landowner for permission to put them up, and put your name and contact information on them. People own land for a host of reasons. And, you know, the idea or the notion that, well, let's just limit this to 300 feet within a dwelling or within a driveway, that does not cover that family picnic area that may be up on the backside of a mountain. That does not include perhaps a family burial plot down, you know, on the backside of the meadow that's more than 300 feet away. And for landowners, these are special places, and they don't want to feel as if that area could get invaded. The privacy in that area could get invaded with a camera. And so we feel that Senate Bill 14, the permission and the labeling are really common courtesy. We think they're great tools. We have members that use them. Many of our members, I would dare say the vast majority of our members do open their land for hunting. I am a hunter, and I get a real charge when people hunt on my property. Youth Turkey Weekend, father and his son came up. They were new to the area, asked me about turkey hunting. I showed them. I gave them pretty good directions on where I had seen a couple times earlier, and said, go for it. Go, you know, this is great. And so I think this bill really does a good job at threading that needle, as Kyle said. And I think in the end will maintain a better relationship between hunters, the hunting community, and landowners out there. The Senate Bill 15, likewise, put your name and contact information. We just want to know who to contact. As I've testified earlier, you go into a logging garage or a forester's office in November, and it's like a hunter's pick and save, because many times there's cameras or there's tree stands that they have encountered, or you know, that they have to remove, or that fell off the tree, whatever, and it's in the corner, and they said, I don't even know who to contact. So again, I think just labeling them, and on the cameras in particular, getting that permission is key. With that, I'll conclude my testimony. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions, and I thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. I have a question regarding, do you have any members that own large tracts of land that are out of state that, in other words, I guess what I'm getting at is I've heard some concerns from the hunting community is like, how would I get in touch with someone that's kind of like absentee, if you will? Where do I go to get permission?
Yeah, great question. Well, it's actually become very easy to contact landowners. Onyx, anyone that hunts knows there are programs out there that can identify who the owner is. In fact, that young man and his son came up and pulled his map up and said, "Okay, where's your hayfield that you said that we could go in?" And I could point him right to it. There's that. The other piece is that and if there is an out-of-state landowner, if property's owned by a trust or it's owned by someone who lives out of state, they almost all have a local manager. They almost all have someone like you heard earlier, like a Mr. Eames or another local manager. And it's relatively easy to identify those. If they've done a timber sale in recent history, you have timber tax records, all of that, where people are filing documents at the town office. It's open for public disclosure that says who's the quote land manager for that out of state. And so there are ways to identify it. It's not impossible. Onyx would be your first go-to place. Tax records are another. And of course, asking around town and looking at, trying to figure out, okay, calling a local logger or calling a local forester, who owns the piece on, Bear Mountain Road. Oh yeah, that's owned by such and such. That's managed by Joe Schmo.
Actually, I may be mistaken, but I think I have that app Onyx on my phone right now.
It's an awesome app.
Well, primarily because it shows you the distance from residences where you were going to fire a weapon or something. Make sure you're not within that footage. So that app would show me then who owns that property. Is that
that app, I've spoken to some foresters and other hunters. Onyx is one. There are other apps out there and of course, you go to a town website. Many of these towns have tax records right there electronically. I've had folks on their phone go to a town website and pull up the app. Again, on the Onyx one, I don't have that on my phone. This fellow had it on his phone, and he was walking me through it, and it appeared to had my name on it, on my parcel. So,
thank you. Any further questions for the witness? Representative.
Mr. Chair, you could rule this question out of order, but I can't help but ask, why do people shoot turkeys? You can't eat them.
Actually, I would answer that by telling you that the breasts are quite delicious. Feel free to expound on that.
I can give you some recipes. Yeah, they do. In springtime, they hunt them in the fall and in the spring. And it's this time of year, month of May.
Thank you for your testimony. Oh, yeah. At this point, the chair recognizes Colonel Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for your time and your service. That $100 reminds us every now and then that is really some pretty good service that you provide for us. So I want to start the same way I started every one of these hearings, by thanking these landowners behind me who took time out of their day for a fourth time to come down here. And I'd like you to remember one very important fact that was mentioned to me in the hallway. They're here to ask you to allow them to keep their land open. I think that's kind of interesting. I can see it if they came down to post it. They're here in an effort to keep it open for guys like me who want to hunt, so that we can hunt later on. And I think what they're asking, I firmly believe what they're asking is reasonable. And another point I want to make, and I know I'm going to embarrass her, and I will ask for her forgiveness, but Mrs. Thompson has never testified before and felt strongly enough today to come down for the first time. So I commend her for doing that. And that's how important it is to these landowners. It is the number one complaint, excuse me, that I get in the fall, is from landowners who find tree stands and or cameras on their property, and they didn't have any knowledge that they were placed there or didn't have the opportunity to say yes or no to it. And so they asked me if people can legally do that, and we don't ever lie to anyone, and I said yes, they can by law. And so the next actual question is, how do I prevent that? Well, I don't really want to answer that question because the only way that they can prevent it is to post their property. And I'm not in that business. I work pretty hard and my staff works pretty hard to encourage people to try and address the issues of why they posted their property and get that property opened. And you heard several landowners behind me who are knowledgeable enough from all four corners of the state, by the way. We have landowners here from the North Country. We have landowners from the southwest corner of the state and the central part of the state. So it's a good representation of our entire state. And it's a good representation of the landowners that I speak with regularly. And so I don't lie to them. I tell them you can prevent it by posting your land, and you would lose your tax benefit if you were taking advantage of that. I can tell you there are a lot of landowners that are here today that really I don't think that's a deciding factor. I think it's a mistake to think that that's going to keep our land open, because from experience, I can tell you it doesn't. They get to a point where they're tired of it. And I would ask you to think about this. I'm a landowner. I pay $8,000 a year in taxes. It's a lot of money. And my land is open and always will be open under any circumstance for a whole host of reasons. But I would be very angry if I went out my back door and walked on my property and found a camera and someone didn't have the courtesy to just ask. I would have allowed it. A lot of these landowners are not here. I guess I won't speak for these folks. A lot of landowners I speak with are not against cameras. They just want to know who it is. They want to know, and there's certain areas on their property that they don't want a camera. And, you know, the way I look at that is I've got a small piece, nothing like Mr. Thompson has, nothing like the acreage that he has, but I have a small piece that's very important to me. If someone were to park a car behind my home or behind any of your homes, you would immediately call the police. Well, a landowner feels that way when they find a camera that no one's asked permission for. It's on their property, be it 300 feet from their home or 3,000 feet. That's their property. They're paying for that. The taxes don't go down the further we get away from a home, right? They pay the same money. So that land is just as important to them on that back 40 as it is the front 40. Please remember that. I think that's key. It's an issue really of a landowner's rights. So now I sit back taking these calls, my other goal is to protect the sportsman. That's really, and that my heart is in that because I'm a sportsman. So how do we balance these two things? And I think this bill has done a really good job in doing that. I got together with the Wildlife Federation. We got them on board, the sportsmen and women. We got the Farm Bureau on board. We got the Timberlands Association. We all got together and said, there's got to be a way to do this so that we're not punishing hunters, and we're recognizing the rights of landowners. And this bill was written kind of with all of those efforts in mind. It's been changed. I've lost track of how many times it's changed. But I think what's before you today, looking at it, is probably the best version. So it's one that I really would encourage you to consider. I want to make sure I've hit all my points here. But another thing that is I never thought of happening. So if you follow any of the deer hunting websites or not websites, but that shows you what I know about the internet, Facebook pages, my younger officers do that, and they tell the old man how to look at this stuff. So I start doing it. And I was amazed when I see some hunters have areas that they put their stands and their cameras up, and they go back to this area year after year, like I do, and they harvest deer every year, and it becomes their area. And so you'll see pictures posted on Facebook of a hunter standing or a person standing in front of their camera, and they'll literally post on Facebook and say, who is this guy that's in my area? On 3 occasions, it's been the landowner. Now, I don't have to tell you how quickly my phone rings when that happens, because now you got a landowner whose picture's on Facebook. He's been insulted by these people, and he wants them off their property. I can't do a lot with that, quite frankly. I can't honestly say, well, that was, it just puts you in a really bad, and I don't think hunters do it intentionally. I just don't think they think about that. And that happens to people. So that's another concern of ours. I have fun with them. I stand in front of them. I hold cards up. Call me. Because I know it takes the picture and the hunter's going to see it. I'm with these guys. I never hear from these folks, of course. We take them on occasion when a landowner doesn't want them there. We'll remove them when I get a very angry landowner because I don't want him to post it. So we'll remove it, and I could put more Sporting Goods out of business with the equipment I have because nobody ever claims it. They think they're going to get a ticket, And so they don't, it's just a mess the way it is. And I think this balances both. This is going to allow a hunter an opportunity to go in and still put his cameras up, and it's going to respect the rights of the landowner. So you had a couple of really good questions. One is, how do we find the landowner? Representative Roy, the chairman, brought up. There are two apps that I use. So OnX is an app, and I can pull it up and show it to you now, but it shows property lines, and I've walked my own using this, and it's very accurate. My officers are using this for distances close to a home. We've entered it in a courtroom, and it's been accepted. What's really neat about it is it tells you pretty much without exception who the landowner is. You immediately see the name. You can contact that person. It shows you where their home is, where their outbuildings are. So it helps hunters stay away from those areas or from those sensitive areas. OnX, there's a fee for that. You can download it on your phone. I think I pay $31 a year for each app. Hunt Stand is another free app that I have on my phone. From a question from one of the other hearings, I want to make sure. Hunt Stand is free. You can go to a app store. I can't, but folks that know how to do this can, and you can purchase this app, and it'll do the same thing. So it's pretty accurate because it is an issue. I would encourage and have encouraged people who have called us who couldn't find a landowner. We have a lot of resources, and I'll help you do that. Because the goal is to make everybody as happy as to give access to them, and if you can't find a landowner, we can help you do that. So it's not impossible to do. Certainly, we purposely excluded, and I think this is important: municipally owned land, publicly owned land, land owned or managed by the state of New Hampshire. We excluded permission being required for any of those tracts. So it's solely for private land. Municipally owned land was town land. I argued that is not private land. That would be excluded anyway, but we wrote it in just to be clear. So anything owned by the public, we felt hunters should be okay to go on that. So we excluded that. It's just the private landowner that we wanted them to ask permission. Another very good question was, how do we make the case on 24-hour? So, and how that came about was as technology advances, we have automatic rifles now that can be fired without folks holding them that are coming out. We have cameras that film live. We have, the technology is ever expanding. And so we were concerned as an agency about hunter ethics. We were concerned about losing fair chase principles, getting away from that. That's an argument that's used to end the sport of hunting, fishing, and trapping, and we engage in those arguments on a regular basis. So I felt it was important for us as an agency to get ahead of that. And so we said, you know what, those aren't fair, to be able to sit in your living room and watch a deer go to a tree stand and throw on your coat and go out back and shoot a deer. And everybody I talk to says, well, you can't do that. Well, I'm here to tell you, you would be mistaken. It can be done, and it's done pretty regularly with great success, quite frankly. And so we came up with an administrative rule a number of years ago that said, and still exists today, that says that you can't harvest a deer within 24 hours of it being viewed on a camera. And we, quite honestly, I helped write that, and I had no idea that I would ever be able to enforce that law, because how would you do that? And I'm here to tell you we do it often, and I'm surprised by that. But the reason that we do it is because the honesty of the people that we encounter, which is refreshing. You go to a hunter and you say, did you see that on a camera? And some of these folks will admit to that, which is nice. Other times you can get a search warrant and pull a camera, as the chairman spoke about, and it's date and time stamped on the camera. Even now, these young kids that we've hired can get it if you've deleted it. So it can be found, frankly. I'm not that worried. We're not that worried about hunters. We've had setups where people had wired cameras sitting in their living room, really bad poaching circumstances. They're rare, but that we've had a number of those where we've made those cases. So those cases are made, but the message here, I think, is more important. The message that it says when we put that in this law is that we believe in hunter ethics, we believe in fair chase principles, and here it is in the law for everyone to see. So I think that's an important piece. The next very good question was, does a landowner have to call us to go get it? And my answer to that would be, even though it's in this law, I would never charge a landowner for removing something on his own property, but I've had many issues with that. A most recent one, I had a young woman remove a camera that was pointed at her house. So, and of course, there's always more to these stories than what you get the first time. But the story was, I had a camera pointed at my house, which I thought was alarming. And she said, so I cut the cable and I removed it. Now the police department's calling me and telling me that I owe them a camera and that I have to pay for the damage I did to the cable. So I called the police department expecting to hear more, and I was not let down. It was a lot more. She had been removed from her home, wasn't supposed to be back there. They'd put a camera on to make sure that she wasn't coming back, and they caught her doing that. The bottom line was, though, that was the property of the town, and she destroyed it removing the camera, because most of these cameras are locked on, so you're going to be forced to cut the cable or cut the lock. And I can tell you from experience, you'll put me in a position where a camera owner will say, well, that's good that Mr. Roy removed my camera, but he destroyed my lock when he did it, and he needs to pay me for the lock. And you know what? He's correct. You do. And so I wanted a landowner to avoid that. I didn't want to put a landowner in that position, so we put in here that you should call. The other important piece of this law was the fact that we asked for the name and contact information to be put on the camera, giving a landowner an opportunity to not get the police involved. He could just call Mr. Roy and say, remove your camera. I don't want it on my property, and give him a chance to work it out. So we tried very hard throughout this bill to balance all of that and to give everyone something that we could all work with. So that's basically how this all came about. And lastly, the fine amount. So the fine originally, I think when it was in the Senate, I followed Chapter 625 under the Criminal Code, which denotes the limits for violations, the limits for misdemeanors. And it says in a violation, if you have a violation of law, you can charge up to $1,000 in fines. I don't know of any violation today that would bring $1,000 in any courtroom. But that's the limit that the law used, so we used that verbiage. We scared the Senate, because I think they thought we were going to charge $1,000 every time we found one of these cameras. And so they reduced that to the 125. I don't really care what the fine is, to be honest with you. I don't have a personal preference on that. There needs to be a consequence so that people will not do it. If the law tells you not to do it, there needs to be a consequence. So I would entertain anything that you wanted to put in there for a fine amount. But that's historically, that's why we're at the place that we are. I really encourage you to think about this. I know that you've gotten emails from hunters. This gentleman from Conway brings up some valid points, but I think we worked really hard to address those. We're allowing the cameras. We're just asking you to have the courtesy to ask the landowner if he's okay with it. That's all. And I don't think that's a big reach. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you, Colonel. From a criminal justice point of view, would it not be a problem for you to make a case if the landowners were out there taking these cameras down? When you get there, the evidence is gone that the violation never occurred? Is that not?
It could affect it, yes. So you could get, I never thought of it. You could get into a chain of custody issue. So if you had a camera on a bait site and there was no permission for the bait to be there either, which happens, and he took the camera and then I looked to get the camera back from him and download that evidence later, I would have a problem in a courtroom with a good defense attorney saying, well, how do you know he didn't put that picture on there? How do you know he didn't? So that's a very good point.
Oh, furthermore, that it was ever placed without permission in the first place?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for the Colonel? Yeah, Representative Pearl.
I have two, but my first one.
Yes.
And you talked about you can't take the deer if you saw it on the camera that day.
Yes.
But what if I saw it on the day before, but it came back the day I went out? How do you know?
Well, you don't. And so some discretion has to be used in that. And I got to tell you, I don't see those. I see every summons these guys issue. I review every one because I look for things like that to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And I don't see that happening. When I see it happening is when it's used in conjunction with poaching or illegal baiting, because it could happen. You could have a camera up, see a picture of a deer, and I'm not against them in this regard. People work hard. They don't have time to sit in their stands every day. I get that. So if they get a camera and it says, okay, there's a buck coming here, every night at 4 o'clock, if I get in this stand, I have a likelihood of seeing a deer. That's what those cameras should be used for. So I saw that yesterday. Today, I'm beyond that time. I want to sit in my stand. And without me knowing it, that deer came out at 10 o'clock and got caught on my camera. You're going to know that in an interview. You're going to know when you're dealing with folks. And so that's a gray area, but it doesn't happen often for us. So, yeah, good question.
those cameras going to be in the auction this Saturday?
I don't, you know, to be honest with you, I have not brought those cameras over there. We should probably do that. I've got a pile of them all over the state and they should go. And, you know, that's another reason that I think this exploded is because cameras, when they first came out, were very expensive. There weren't many people, and we use them. I put them up for litter sites. When we have a road that people are going down and dumping mattresses, we put these cameras out to try and catch people. We've had great success with them. So they are a great tool, but what's happened now is the cost of these has greatly reduced. So you can buy these things for $20, and I think people are, we've got cameras on cameras I've got cameras pointed at other cameras to figure out who's hunting. And, you know, it's just gotten ridiculous. And I just think there has to be a little slowdown there before we lose our opportunity to hunt on land owned by these generous folks behind us.
I agree with you.
Representative Selig.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. I'm not a hunter. I'm gonna put that out there. I'm not a hiker. I get lost if you put me between 3 trees. So I'm a
Please don't go.
Yeah, I'm a city girl. My kids won't let me in the woods by myself anymore. I'm curious whether with the cameras, the way the system is now, if a landowner were to go out and see cameras on their property and they happen to be traveling with a backpack full of blankets and keep tossing them over the cameras, is that like, I'm sort of trying to understand whose rights are.
So a landowner has every right to do that. I've suggested to landowners, rather than take it down if you're concerned about a camera pointed at a barn because people don't like farmers, for instance. You have every right to go over and I suggested putting a piece of tape over it or covering the camera and calling us and we'll come and get it. You have every right to do that. Every right. If you destroy property or you start seizing property of other people, then you're kind of in a tricky spot.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead. Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to ask, I was thinking about kind of the responsibilities that would fall on Fish and Game.
Yes.
And it sounds to me, first of all, like the phone calls that you're getting from landowners, you're already getting that. This would
Yes.
just kind of provide a better process for it. But also, I think on behalf of the hunters, let me just say, not a hunter. I own
Yes.
literally a tenth of an acre. But my question would be, you know, I would think that in order to be fair and for this to be a reasonable expectation of hunters, there would need to be a lot of education. We're seeing a lot of
Absolutely.
organizations that work with people,
Yes.
you know, that represent a lot of people who would, you
Good
know,
question.
I'm just wondering about, you know, how you would go about educating the public so that it is reasonable expectation.
So we
everybody
did that. A good example of how that's a very good question. I should have testified to that. So because the gentleman from Conway is a very good example of that. And I don't mean to pick on him, but he's a very good example because he came in kind of late. So he's trying to figure this out, and most hunters will be in that position. And so when you folks gave us the lead law for fishing, I don't know if you recall that, when lead was excluded from being used for tackle for fishing, it was almost 2 years before we ever issued a summons on that. So we went around, when you caught people with that illegal stuff, we'd explain to them why it was illegal. You can't purchase it, you can't possess it, can't use it. We used it as an opportunity to educate people. I see us doing that for a good deal, at least a year, for cameras, because it's going to take time for people that work and can't attend these hearings to understand. So we would educate them long before we charge them. The thing I stress to my officers is very important to me. The goal of law enforcement is not to punish people. Although there's officers out there that believe that's our goal, it's not. Our goal is to change that behavior. So if you can change that behavior by having a conversation with somebody, you succeeded. You don't have to write the ticket. That's the judge's job. That's not my job. So education is a very important piece. So we would plan, if this were to pass, we would put it on our website, we would do public notification for it, and we would be on an educational campaign for a year. And some of the younger guys get frustrated with that, but it's important, I think. And then when you start charging people, there is no reason at that point, a year later, that they shouldn't know that this is the law. It's been well publicized. So very good question.
And you produce a pamphlet you hand out every
do.
year when everybody renews their license. That
In the front of the book, we'll put changes to the laws this year, and we'll put this thing front and center. And we'd get a lot of calls. I'm getting a lot of calls on it now from both landowners and camera people because they want to know where we're at with it. Oh, good point, Rob. The effective date, we moved the effective date out on this bill. If you look, I think it's not even going to be in effect this fall for that reason, to start the educational. But thank you, Rob, to start the educational piece.
And that's good because
yes,
bow season starts in 2 months, 3 months.
It's
and
too
people are
soon. You
already
got
out
people
there.
already out there,
Yeah.
so it'll give them a chance to do something different.
Representative Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question.
Yes, sir.
Since we primarily look at a violation would occur when someone takes a camera and puts it on somebody's land and it's not labeled at number one.
Correct.
And they don't have permission, number two. They would have to meet both of those
That's correct.
situations, and then that would be a violation.
Yep.
Okay, I
Yep.
just
And,
wanted to
and
make
in
sure.
those scenarios, we don't always issue both violations. You'd issue a warning for, I would anticipate a warning for one and a violation ticket for the other until we get people. But yes, that would be two separate violations.
And as follow-up, so I'm going to retract my follow-up. I'll think about it now.
All right.
I have a question then Representative Murray.
Yes.
I'm thinking about how I'm going to label my tree stands, and I'm picturing a 3x5 card laminated with a zip tie somewhere up on the stand.
Yep.
Would it be worth looking at a potential for someone tampering with taking that off?
There would be. And so, if anyone were to ask me, I would tell them to try and engrave it or scratch it on there somewhere. And I wouldn't even mind if it were, in a position where it's not readily seen. Because I got to tell you, me labeling my stuff, I'm not real anxious to put my name on a tree stand. I've got a few people out there that aren't real fond of me. And so I could see it providing an opportunity. Police officers have already reached out to me and said, I don't really want to put my name on that. I said, well, if we're going to make everybody else do it, fellas, we got to do it. But I get that. So I don't know that would be, and I think we would take that with, if I were to find a stand like that, and we require them to label bait sites now with a 3x5 card, and typically a hunter will go in there and remove it. We know that. So you'll go in and you see the stand and you say to the guy, hey, you don't have your sign up, and he tells you, well, I had it up, I had it on that tree, and somebody removed it. You tell him put it back up. So it's not a huge deal. It's just I would engrave it if I were you, and the other reason I would do that if someone stole it, it gives us a way to get it back, which is helpful too, I think.
Representative Murray, and then Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Colonel, for taking my question.
Yes.
It actually was related to that because, I'm concerned about the privacy rights of the hunters as
Yes,
well.
we were too.
And, I got a lot of emails from folks being concerned about,
Putting
putting
their
their
name.
name and contact information where, anyone can get it, including like, maybe PETA activists
Sure,
or whoever are
sure.
anti-hunting and then
Yep.
doxing these hunters.
Yep.
I guess, how seriously do you think those concerns should be
So
taken?
originally, when I wrote the bill, I put name and address, and I rethought that for that reason. So we put name, and that's why it says contact, a name and a cell phone or something. But that's a concern I've had many hunters say. The only thing I would say to that is we already require names on a number of different things. We require names and addresses on traps, which certainly attracts those types of people. We require names on bob houses, fishing bob houses, bait sites. So there's a number of things out there already, and we've not had, knock on wood, we've not had real issues with that. So we don't feel that there will be an issue with this. Thank you. We also have good hunter harassment laws to address that. So if someone were to do that, I would be all over that because that escalates very rapidly.
Representative Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Colonel, for taking this question. I know you said earlier that you would never do this, but I'm concerned that the way the law, this Section 4 is written, in other words, as I understand this, and this seems like a really great bill, and I very much support, but in general, this bill, it seems to me, draws an appropriate balance between hunters, as an example, and landowners,
Yes, sir.
and protects landowners. The one thing that seems to be an exception to that is this Section 4, which it says a property owner shall, not may, but shall contact the department, the Fish and Game Department, to have a camera removed. And so, am I wrong? That seems to me that is actually something that changes the law from what it is now to take away a landowner's right. In other words, right now, if I read this, a landowner cannot, if Section 4 were enacted, a landowner could not even if they presumably, even if they had posted their land no hunting,
Right.
a landowner goes out walking on their posted land, sees a camera, they could not just take it down. They would have to call you.
Right.
And that seems to me, I just wonder if that is sort of an unintended consequence that we've in that one respect, you've taken away some rights from landowners that they currently have.
Yep.
And I guess as I read it, I mean, if we were to enact this section 4 and a landowner were to do what I just said, the landowner would be subject to the penalty because they would have violated the statute.
It could be, yes. I think more importantly, though, if they remove it, they've subject themselves to civil penalties for the damages to remove it. So that's the issue that we've had is when a landowner, if we didn't put something in there to tell landowners not to do it, the landowners would in fact do it. And you're going to get into we've been the referee in several of these where you have a hunter who wants his equipment back and a landowner who says, well, you're not getting it back because you put it on my property illegally. Well, you can't do that by law. You're now seizing equipment that you don't own. The law uses this same type of thought process when it comes to abandoned vehicles or abandoned property. That's why our laws now, criminal laws, prevent a landowner, for instance, from seizing a car left on his property. There's a whole bunch of steps they have to go through before they can do that for these same reasons. Is you are exposing a landowner. It's really a protection for the landowner because you're exposing them to all kinds of civil penalties or violations of law if they seize the camera, because then it becomes kind of a neighborhood dispute between the hunter, the sportsman, and the landowner, because landowners don't want to give it back. My experience has been they want to seize it, and they want to meet the hunter, and they want to lecture him, and it never goes well. And so we have found that it's better to intervene early in that than wait for that kind of scenario to go on. The landowner still has the right. He has the immediate right to call at any time. All we're saying is rather than you go out and expose yourself to these liabilities, call us and we'll do it. Most landowners do that now anyway. And I have been asked by the Farm Bureau about that very issue. We discussed that when we wrote this bill early on. And I laid out kind of the issues with allowing people to do that, the problems that we've had doing that. And we decided I want to protect the landowner from that kind of liability. I can tell you I would never allow a summons to be written for a landowner doing something on his own property. That just wouldn't happen. But I think the language needs to be strong so that we don't have landowners out there climbing tree stands and seizing this stuff without the authority of the law enforcement community being behind that.
Yeah, that's just one follow. I guess the thing that I'm not, I think you need to draw a distinction, don't you, between, it's one thing, it would seem to me, for the landowner that sees a camera or a tree stand in the situation we've posited,
right,
to go take it down. That's one thing. It would seem to me the landowner ought to have the right to do that. Now, if you're talking about, and I think this is what you're talking, if you're talking about the landowner seizing it in the sense of it's now become my property and I don't have to give it back,
right,
that's a different issue, isn't it?
It could be. You could separate those two, but you still run the risk of most of this stuff that's put up there, and I can tell you from experience of seizing a lot of it, is locked down or cabled down or the cables are in and they don't know how to function it. And so when you remove it, you end up destroying sometimes the property to do it. And the minute a landowner does that, he's now exposed himself to replacement of that property. And I can tell you that's been a problem. And landowners don't think about that until I tell them that, and they're surprised by that. But I said, well, that's private property, even though it's there illegally. It's owned by this individual, and he has the right to be whole. And you have to put that stuff back that you've destroyed. And so it kind of exposes a landowner to a liability I didn't really want to. The other issue I have, the other real concern I have is being caught doing it. I can tell you in a uniform, I've been caught doing it, and hunters get pretty aggressive about that because that's their property. And I worry if a hunter were to find a landowner removing that property, we'd expose them to, you've got armed individuals. I just worry about that whole confrontation piece. So we kind of put that in there to avoid that. That was our goal.
Representative Prue, did you have a question? Okay. Any further questions?
That
for the
scares
Colonel?
me, Representative Brew.
I think maybe somebody else answered.
I hope you decided the right thing.
Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, all good. They're very good questions, and we did it. I kind of insisted on that piece of it just based on my experience with landowners and property owners. I worry about putting them in that. And the law, if you think about it, criminal law has addressed that at many different levels for the same reasons. They make you post abandoned cars. There's all kinds of things you have to go through before you can seize a car that's left on your property, which shouldn't be that way, but it has to be.
go ahead.
My thing was, instead of their whole name and address, just
Yes.
their first name and a telephone number.
That would be fine.
Yeah.
If they put their name, it doesn't say last name or first name. If it says name and contact information, I'd be fine with that. Yeah.
SciTech.
Mr. Chair, I hope the Colonel has a good succession plan.
I have some great people. I'm very fortunate. That's why I hang on. I got to get out of the way here very soon, but I have good people. Thank you, sir.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony. Unless representative's giving you something else you need to say.
We did.
Are you all set?
I'm all set, sir.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
And now,
Thank you all for your time today. I wanted to hear what the Colonel had to say because I wanted to come at this from a slightly different perspective than what's been presented today. We've heard a lot about feelings, traditions, technology, and so forth. And from my perspective and people that I know who want hunting and want to manage timber and wildlife for everybody to be able to enjoy, not doing this creates conflict. This bill creates a better climate of cooperation. And getting away from the feelings, the traditions, and technology, I'd like to ask everybody on this committee to look to something that maybe they've not looked at recently. The first section of the New Hampshire Constitution. Our New Hampshire Constitution is unique in the country. It's much stronger than the federal Constitution relative to a number of things. Everything from property rights to choice of gender and race and everything else. We've changed it twice within my lifetime that I'm aware of. So it can be changed when we want it to be. But the two pillars of our Constitution comes down to privacy and property rights. And to speak to both Representative Newell's point about 1/10 of an acre, it's her property. Does it matter if it's 1/10 of an acre or 100 acres? Does it matter? To speak to the property issue related to trees, that's property. Under New Hampshire law, it's a crop. Under common law, it's a crop. We have the right to harvest. A lot of folks in the hunting community don't realize when they put a tree. I had Officer Chris McEwen a number of years ago come onto my tree farm and remove a property that I've managed since I was 14, remove a tree stand from a veneer grade red oak that took 60 years to grow. To Representative Selig's question about property damage. Well, I'm afraid she's not here at the moment. It seems to me to be turned on its head, to speak maybe to Mr. Rhodes' point, Representative Rhodes' point, seems to me to be turned on its head that the owner of the land is now going to be held liable for damage to property that somebody has not simply abandoned like a car, but literally gone onto the property and strapped with a cable to a tree. That is that's a pretty strong indication of a permanent desire to have that observation device there. That sounds more like trespass to me and to a lot of folks who come across the situation. for all kinds of, I mean, to not have the courtesy to be able to call, as a landowner, to call somebody who put a piece of property, be it a tree stand or a camera, to not be able to do that, to call them and say, hey, look, you know, not against cameras, we could put this one in a different place, or whatever. I mean, that's what should happen. You should not have, and I think it speaks to a situation, you should not have somebody like the colonel indicating that they remove these things all the time and they actually call, you know, they take a picture in front of them with a card held up. And yet, no, from what he said, nobody comes and claims this stuff. The fact that we're even discussing this to this level is really, really disturbing. I mean, I look to my ancestors for a lot of guidance because they dealt with stuff a lot tougher than we are. And technology changes. To Representative Boyden, I believe, who mentioned a question about audio. Does it really matter? Does it matter whether it's a picture or audio or a drone or a camera strapped to a tree? Technology is changing all the time. Go back and read our Constitution. The one thing about, we can disagree about 10 or 15 or 20% of it amongst ourselves. That's fine. But there's one thing about the constitutions, the state constitution in particular. It does not allow us to be schizophrenic. It really doesn't. Unless you want to change the Constitution, it is what it is. And it was respectful of people and their various forms of property. And we need to think about that. And we need to think about the diffusion of our resources and the actual cost associated when we have Fish and Game going hither and yon, dealing with things that are so easily solved. I fully support hunting. I have many people who hunt on my property, friends and neighbors. They are very possessive of the property, in a manner of speaking, from a safety standpoint and other things. I fully support this bill to require the simple courtesy of a name or number or whatever is determined to be right on a piece of private property that is transported to another person's property and strapped onto a tree or something else. It's an observation device. It's a form of trespass. It should not be tolerated. Look to the Constitution and get rid of an area of conflict. Please. Do you have any questions? I wouldn't mind being challenged on some of these things. I've thought them through a lot, and I know you folks put in a lot of time.
I wouldn't challenge you, but I would point out that the Constitution is to restrict the government and not fellow citizens.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Can you say that again?
The Constitution is to restrict the government, not fellow citizens. Having said that, I agree with your points.
The Constitution affirms, my perspective, Constitution affirms the rights that we have as citizens. Those rights in the Constitution, both federal and state, says that we essentially loan those rights to the government for the purpose of forming a more perfect society, in essence. Correct?
I think I would love to have a legal debate with you over a cup of coffee, but I have to get this.
So, understood, but I'm going to put it to the rest of the members then. Whatever your opinion is, respectfully, the government should not be getting in the middle of issues that affect private property when there's a better way to handle this. It is not reasonable to make a property owner, a landowner, liable for damage to a piece of equipment that is being removed by an officer of the law in any shape or form. That's been permanently attached, essentially, at least for more than a season usually. That's not the place to put our foot down.
The way I understood it, if the peace officer takes it, the landowner is not responsible. That's why the officer is coming to take it and not the landowner.
And
is that correct, Carl?
Good.
Thank you.
I simply think it's a very sad situation when we're placing landowners in conflict with people that we actually want to support their rights. We want to, well, excuse me, privileges of hunting on land and so forth. You are going to be causing, if this is not passed in a decent form, you are going to be causing the mass posting of many pieces of property across the state. That I do not like. And I think we need to, I've said enough, but there are no more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Doesn't matter, 1/10 of an acre or 100, it's still your own land.
Thank you for your testimony. Is anyone else who has not filled out the card who wishes to testify on this bill today? Seeing none, I hereby close the public hearing on SB 14. And we are going to take a 10-minute break, and we will open the public hearing on SB 15. Just for everyone's edification, we'll be executing this probably about 15 to 20 minutes after we close that hearing. So hopefully we'll be moving much more expeditiously, because if you testified on 14, there's no need to tell us the same thing on 15.
They need to hear it sometimes.
At this point, we're gonna open the public hearing on SB 15. And who's sponsoring it? Okay, and Daley Frenette to introduce the bill for Senator Pearl.
Good afternoon, Chairman Roy and members of the committee. My name is Daley Frenette, and I'm the Senate Majority Caucus Director. I'm here this afternoon to introduce Senate Bill 15 on behalf of Senator Pearl. Senate Bill 15 amends the permissible uses of tree stands, observation blinds, and pit blinds. As amended, Senate Bill 15 clarifies that people who wish to erect a tree stand, observation blind, or pit blind must have written permission from the property owner. It also requires that any tree stand, observation blind, or pit blind be labeled with the owner's name and contact information. The bill also designates that they may be erected on property between August 1st and December 31st of the calendar year and must be removed by the end of this time period unless permission is given by that property owner. Property owners may call local or state law enforcement or a conservation officer to remove and seize a permanent, portable, or temporary tree stand or observation blind which was placed or the owner of which has failed to remove that equipment. Senator Pearl hopes that by giving landowners more say in what goes on their property, it will incentivize them to keep their land open for New Hampshire hunters. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak this morning. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to bring them back to Senator Pearl for you.
No, thanks. We actually like instant responses to our questions. So thank you. And relay our thanks to Senator Pearl. At this point, the chair recognizes, well, actually, before I call any witnesses, if you've already testified and you're going to testify again, please just limit it to the tree stands, because we pretty much understand, I think, the concept that everyone's trying to impress upon us on the private property, and for the most part, I think we are all in agreement. So at this point, I would call Susan Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Susan Price, Fish and Game Commissioner for Carroll County. It's really just a replay of my prior testimony. The only difference is this actually is a hunting bill. This is very specific, tree stands are used primarily by hunters. But all the other issues really stand, and the commission is dedicated to increasing and maintaining public access wherever we can. So we are in full support of this bill, and much like the prior one, we worked very hard with the stakeholders to make this a very workable bill, and we would very much appreciate your support.
Thank you. Any new questions? Representative.
Yeah, you know what, I have just a question. This is really a sort of a language question. It says in paragraph 4, except for permissions granted by property owners in paragraphs 5 and 6, and then it goes on to say that the permittee has to carry the permit with him and display it if asked to do so by a conservation officer. And I guess my question is this. So it says, except for permissions in paragraph 5 and 6. 5 talks about permanent tree stands or observation blinds, and 6 talks about temporary tree stands or observation blinds. So my question is, what if those two are accepted from the requirement of having your permit with you? What ones are you required to have your permit with you?
I think this is the as amended by the House. I believe so.
The latest version. This is the latest version.
Amended, yes. I really can't speak to that. That was not in the original bill, and I can't speak to the logic for that language as it was amended.
Okay, I mean.
So perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps.
We'll save that for the Crown.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. All right. Thanks.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you. The chair recognizes Kyle Baker.
Hello again. I'll be incredibly brief. Wildlife Federation fully supports this bill. If you're placing a piece of property, you're something on somebody else's property, you should put your name and contact information on it. So, but that's it.
I'm going to go relatively quickly through these witnesses, so if you do have a question, please don't be shy and let me know. The chair recognizes Anna Mark Davis again.
Thank you again. I'm still Ann Davis. I still own 500 acres next to the John F. Guile Memorial State Forest. We had an experience about 4 years ago with a fellow who had a tree stand right next to one of our trails. It was not marked, and I put a note on the tree stand, please contact me. We're not comfortable having you have this tree stand here. He finally did call me back. He said, well, this is a really good location because a lot of game comes down this trail. And I said, yes, I realize that, but I'm not comfortable with it. Would you please move it? So my suggestion is, and I support this bill because it would give landowners and hunters an opportunity to sort this out before they were already set up for the season. We've had a good relationship since then, even though he was a little reluctant to move the tree stand. So the other component is he did put the stand, it was a temporary stand, it didn't have any damage to the tree that he used. But I just think it would be prudent to give us all a chance to have another conversation and a contact with the hunting community, and I think that would help facilitate this. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your service on our behalf to the state.
And thank you for sharing with us.
I'm assuming you don't have any questions.
Yeah, no one spoke up, so nope. Sheila and Tom Thompson.
Thank you. Just briefly, I want to thank the committee for allowing us to come down and speak. Both my wife and I support Senate Bill 15 also as written. And I would just like to emphasize one thing about the relationship that we as landowners have had over the years with the New Hampshire Fish and Game, and in particular with the Colonel Jordan and other members of his staff have been incredibly helpful to us in various things from hunting, fishing, and vandalism, and we thank them for the service that they provide. Thank you all.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Jeff Ames. Walter Lacey.
Thanks. I think I pretty much covered everything that needed to be said. This is the culmination of a frustration of a number of years, and my issue has been in the past is I'd come across a stand. Is it abandoned? And I left flagging with my name and never heard from these people. And so that's been frustrating just to establish a dialogue. And the other thing is it's frustrating to have trees damaged. So I think it's a simple resolution. Put your name on it and get permission. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony today. Chair calls Mr. Ledgard. Chair calls Mr. McKinney. Jason Stock.
Jason Stock with the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. We support the bill. We think it's for all the reasons you just heard, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Real quick, just for the committee, could you tell us the potential damage or monetary value of we heard a testimony before of a near grade piece of timber. How much could that cost the landowner by somebody putting screws into it or strapping it too tight?
Yeah, I mean, a veneer grade log is, I mean, you can be talking hundreds of dollars if it's a single log, single veneer grade log. This bill deals with portable tree stands as opposed to permanent where you're putting screws in that, that's already covered in law. But even with a portable, if you leave a stand on, and if there's a chain, the tree will actually grow around it. And of course, that log is no longer useful. So even portables, if they're left up for extended periods of time, can damage trees. So yeah, you're talking hundreds of dollars for a single stem.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Carson Springs?
I'd like to echo Jason's testimony and give you a couple of quick examples. I support both this bill and the last bill as well, obviously. I was the one who mentioned the veneer grade oak. That was a situation where Chris McKee, again, that officer, he had to go running around. There's a number of oaks back there where people have been putting stands up. And he had to go running up and down the street, knocking on doors to try to figure out whose it was because it was just off a property where there's a development. That's a waste of their time. If there'd been a name on there, we could have easily just called them. Second situation was one where the person does put their, I mean, we have some good people in our area. They put their name and number on the tree stand, knew who it was, gave them a ring. It gave me a chance to educate them about the value of the timber that they didn't know about. They didn't know they'd stuck it on a high-grade sugar maple. And we have a great relationship. That was 10 or 12 years ago. And they hunt my property now. Again, like I said in the first bill, this is cooperation. This is about respect of private property. So please pass this bill unchanged and just move on.
Thank you. The chair calls Colonel Jordan.
Kevin Jordan, again, the Chief of Law Enforcement, New Hampshire Fish and Game, and thanks again for entertaining us. And I'm sorry for all the trouble. Another really good question. I wish you'd have stayed at home today, quite frankly. So I'm going to try to explain how that came about. So the original law, 20736A, I believe it is, for tree stands, requires today, if you were to put up a permanent tree stand is any tree stand that does damage to property or could potentially do that, or anything that you insert into a tree. So screwed in steps, cutting tree branches so I have a clear shot with a bow, a built one where you're nailing it to the tree. Any of those types of stands require written landowner permission, and you have to have that permission with you. That was created a number of years ago, and we enforce that today. If you hunt in stands like I use, which are climbers, and if you're not familiar with those, they're cables that go around a tree. They're portable. You're very light. You can drag them in with you when you're ready to hunt, and you climb the tree using the stand. It doesn't do any damage other than scratching the bark going up, but it doesn't insert anything into the tree, and you'd remove it at the end of the day. There is no requirement for written landowner permission for that. We still encourage hunters to go to the landowner and ask that, permission to do it, but there's not a requirement for a permit. So then again, going back to my original with the camera, similar calls from landowners every fall. They don't know who these people are. These stands are up. They didn't ask my permission, so we were trying to address both these issues. Last year, we tried to address it. It went sideways because the two bills were attached together. They were amended multiple times, and it became a real mess, and the House finally said, and I think correctly, we can't pass this. So this year, I separated those two. So I wrote a camera bill, and then I wrote a tree stand bill. So the tree stand bill, in an effort to balance, as I've said before, the rights of a landowner and the ability for sportsmen and women to hunt, we put in some caveats in this, which ended up, I think, making it a little bit confusing. So the goal here is to allow the use of stands, just like we always did, not change the permanent stands, so a landowner still has to give permission for that. And we went a step further in saying that one other problem that I get, or call that I get from landowners, is these stands go in and they stay up permanently. And the reason they stay up permanently is because hunters have a good spot and they don't want someone else to move in there. So they leave their stands up, frankly. They'll give you 100 excuses, but the fact of the matter is they'll leave their stand up because they want me, when I come in as a hunter, to see that there's already a tree stand there and go somewhere else. And so they end up leaving these stands up, claiming their property, claiming their special spot. A lot of landowners don't like that, obviously. So I didn't want to take that away from a hunter if they wanted to do it and the landowner doesn't care. I hunt on property. The landowner doesn't care if I leave it up. He says you can leave it up all year for all I care, as long as you're not hurting my property. So we wrote this bill to allow for both. So what we said was you can only put them in that time frame between August 31st and December 31st of each calendar year. Unless, and it has to be removed. I put January 1st every year. It got amended in the House to April 1st, and it escapes me why that happened, but I'm okay with that. Unless you get permission from the landowner that says, I don't care, and then you can leave it up. So it gives both the sportsman, in my opinion, it gives the sportsman the ability to do just what they're doing today with permission, and it gives a landowner to say, no, I don't want that, I want it removed. I was trying to balance both. And so the paragraph that you're asking about, sir, is except for permission granted by property owner in paragraph 5 and 6, we didn't require it. This is where it's a little confusing. I didn't require it in writing. So a permanent tree stand, you have to get it in writing from the landowner. Representative Roy would have to sign his name saying it gives Kevin Jordan permission to hunt. We didn't ask for written permission for all these other things, and I'll tell you why I didn't do that. Is my experience as a hunter and as a game warden, landowners are very hesitant to sign their name to something that says, I'm going to allow you to climb a tree on my property. Even though we have good liability laws on the books, and they've been tested in a case in Deerfield recently, where a landowner is protected against liability if a hunter gets hurt on their property, there are a number of landowners who will tell you, including the one I hunt on, I'm not signing anything. I'll give you permission, but I'm not signing anything. And so I was concerned about that we'd put hunters in a position where a landowner really didn't care that they were on their property, but they didn't want to sign it. And so I said, just get permission. And you'll notice the word written is excluded, and that's the reason for that. So how this would work, I would encounter a hunter, Jason Stock, hunting on a piece of property. I would say to Jason, you have permission to have that tree stand here? Yes, I do. I went to Rob Johnson, the landowner, and he gave me permission to do that. I can check on that. I can call Rob Johnson if I want to do that and find out if he gave him permission. I don't need something in writing. If I required it to be in writing, Rob Johnson might tell him, no, I'm not going to sign it, and then he can't hunt on it. So that's kind of the reason we did that. So we're saying in that paragraph, except as required in 5 and 6, which is that special permission, you have to carry that written permission from the former law that says that you are okay to have a permanent stand. Did I clear that up, or did I confuse you more?
You confused me more.
That's the intent of it. If you have a better way to write it, I'm all ears. But that's the intent. We were trying to balance. We didn't want to change the prior law. We think it's a good law, but we didn't want to require landowners to sign something they didn't want to sign, or they were leery of signing. I've had many conversations with landowners saying, if you allow people on your land, if you allow a snow machine trail, ATV trail, or a tree stand, and a sportsman or woman get injured, you're not liable. But we live in a world where we all know sometimes it costs money to prove that you're innocent. And as long I'm being sued, I think I've got 4 lawsuits pending on me currently. It's pretty common for anybody that does anything in this business, you get sued. And I'm being sued in one case where I followed the law to the letter, and I'm still being sued. It costs money to prove that you're innocent. So I didn't want to put a landowner in that position. I didn't want a hunter to not have an opportunity to hunt a piece of property because a landowner was concerned about signing something. So we wrote it in this fashion. Requires you to get the permission, but it's not in writing that could be used against the landowner later. The other, the Senate may amend this when it goes back because they are concerned about turkey stands in the spring, which I didn't give any thought to. So we may have to go back to that date of January 1 for the removal to allow people to put them up in the spring, but I'm going to let the Senate decide that. That isn't in this version.
So the January 1 date change, I may have some responsibility. I was
thank you
concerned-
very much, sir.
I was concerned about elderly hunters
Yes.
being out there in December in 2 feet of snow,
Right.
trying to get a metal tree. I was worried about heart
Yep.
attacks, falling.
Yep.
I said, "What's the problem? Waiting another couple of months till the ground is safe."
Yep.
So I'd have similar concerns about a turkey stand. First of all, I didn't know people didn't just.
Well,
hunt
so
turkey from
my
the ground.
point to Senator Pearl's a friend of mine. I said, I don't know, Howard, that it makes a difference on a stand or blind for a turkey, but I didn't want to interfere with that. I don't want to create a scenario where you interfere with that. So I was open for that discussion. And actually, that idea was presented to me by Chairman Spillane about the wintertime thing, and we conceded to allow the April. I try to make it simple for folks because my experience has been the more simple you make it, the less violations you get. So if you say they got to be out by December 31st or January 1st, people remember that. They can remember April 1st too. So it doesn't matter as long as it's clear, I think. And remember, they can get permission and none of that applies. If they got a landowner that doesn't care, then all of that is null and void. It's just making them go to the landowner is the goal here.
Further questions? Representative Newman?
Just a quick question.
Yes,
So
sir.
the person that has that, if they want them off as a specific date, if they're going to give permission to someone, they could put any date that they want.
They could put
with
anything
that.
they want. It's their land. Yep. If this is absent a date or absent permission, it would have to be that way. Yes. Landowner reserves that right to do whatever they want.
I'm not sure it's this bill or the previous bill. It says that your department is going to create a form for the permission.
I think it's this one which we have already for the permanent stand. So we have one.
And that form allows for any date to be put
It
in?
does.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. It's just landowners are I don't know if you found that, but landowners are very nervous about signing their names, and I understand that.
Yeah.
So we left this provision in so they wouldn't have to if they chose not to.
Representative Lynn, did you need some further clarification on that, or?
So well, I guess I don't want, my former job used to be a nitpicker. So
Yep.
that's why I'm nitpicking.
I would have
here.
called you a judge. I think
Right,
a judge
right.
was.
So here's what am I understanding then that you don't need to have a permit that you carry with you if you construct a permanent tree stand with permission that doesn't have to be written permission, but the tree stand cannot damage the tree, because if it is going to damage the tree, then you have to have written permission.
That's correct.
Okay.
Except you called it in the first part of it a permanent, so it really wouldn't be a permanent one.
Well, but see, that's where I have a problem, because in paragraph 1, it talks about
That's the original law. Yep.
that's the original law, and that
Yep.
talks about it whether it damages a tree.
That's
right?
correct.
And
Or
and
serves.
for that you need written permission.
That's correct. And you have to
But
carry that on your
You have to
person.
carry it on you.
Yep.
But paragraph 5 also talks about a permanent tree stand, and that doesn't require written permission.
It
So-
does, and it doesn't describe the same detail as the paragraph 1 up above. You're right. So that could have been eliminated, quite frankly. I'm not sure how that got put in there, but that particular line could have been eliminated. I think we're on the same page, you and I.
Okay.
I think you understand what we're trying to do here, but it would be helpful if that first line, that number 5, really doesn't need to be there. I hate to see it go back to another committee, because I worry every time this goes before a committee, but
I hear you.
yeah.
I hear you.
We could, if the Senate's intending to work on it anyway, just let them take
Do that. I can ask Senator Pearl to do that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. for your
Thank you
testimony.
very much, sir.
Is there anyone here wishing to testify in SB 15 who did not submit a card and wishes to do so? Seeing none, I hereby close the public hearing on SB 15, and we are going to open the executive session on SB 14. And I will make a motion of ought to pass, seconded by Representative Harriet Gathright. I'll speak to my motion. I think we've heard plenty of testimony today. I'm a hunter. I watch out for hunters' rights. Part of the reason the bill failed last year because somehow between all the committees and the two different bodies, it, in my opinion, ended up to be a mess. This is much cleaner. It protects landowners, protects hunters. I think it does what it sets out to do. So in the interest of keeping land available for hunters to hunt, I suggest that we pass this bill. Would you like to speak to your second, Representative Gathright?
I think it was well said, and I truly enjoyed all the testimony from the homeowners, landowners today. So it was quite interesting. Thank you.
Discussion. Representative Mannion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to address Representative Lynn's concerns, I understand that being in the law, the penalty could apply to the landowner, I mean, the property owner as well. But I think it talking about forfeiting the game camera and fastening devices in the penalty section kind of proves our intent that it's towards the game camera person as opposed to the property owner. So that Roman numeral 4 about them contacting the law enforcement officer, I don't think the penalty would apply to that.
I think that if you had a literalist justice, it may. If you had one that bothered to look at the intent of the legislature, that it would not. And are speaking about it right now, we are making our intent known. So, well, exactly. Any further discussion? Representative Saitek?
Are the penalties enough? It's almost like it's just a license fee as opposed to a real penalty. $125? What's that?
It's a, I believe that this was vetted pretty hard by numerous different people on whether that was enough. It does go up to $1,000 potentially for a violation. And I think that they came to the conclusion that for a lot of people that hunt, they're not necessarily people of means, and $125, I believe that they thought was enough. Whether or not it is or not, I guess time will tell. They would forfeit their equipment, which is probably ends up being more than that in the end. And I am curious to know, Colonel Jordan, are there license ramifications for this?
Oh, all right.
As we get older, the years we have to hunt shrink, and losing one of them is very valuable. Representative Newell.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things I really appreciate about this bill and the way that it's written is that, and you know, what I think is reflected in a lot of the testimony is that it's not meant to be a stick. It's meant to be a carrot. It's meant to be something that is like, or not a carrot, but it's meant to be something that is a nudge and say, hey, let's be courteous to each other and things like that. Not necessarily, if you do this, then I'm not putting this properly, but you get my point. So I'll be voting in favor.
Yeah, it's definitely educational, but it does have some teeth. Any further comments? Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be voting in support, but I would have liked to have seen a clause whereby property owners could have removed the game cameras on their own with no liability for damage to those cameras, as those cameras are placed there without the permission of the property owners. But you know, I don't want to throw away the perfect for the good. So absolutely, I think it's a obviously necessary, and I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. I just to respond to that, I struggled with that a little bit too, but at the end, from the Criminal Justice Committee standpoint, if a landowner takes it down, what they've done is they've taken away the evidence of the crime. So if you call the Fish and Game to come out and say, hey, this person violated this law, they put this camera up without permission, okay, take me to it. Well, it's in my garage. Well, they can't prove the crime anymore. So, and I really do take stock in what the Colonel said is avoiding confrontations with armed hunters in the middle of the woods, some of them who are not necessarily as nice as we would hope. And it can be very intimidating I'd hate to see a landowner get in that position. So I agree. My natural instinct says my property, I can do what I want. But unfortunately, for the purposes of proving the crime and avoiding unnecessary tragedies, I think that it's best left that way. But you are free to lobby the Senate. Any further? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor is ought to pass.
Representative Lynn?
Yes.
Representative Pratt?
Yes.
Representative Sytek?
Yes.
Representative Prue?
Yes.
Representative Janvrin?
Yes.
Representative Mannion?
Yes.
Representative Reed?
Yes.
Representative Stone?
Yes.
Representative Tenzar?
Yes.
Representative Gathright?
Yes.
Representative Brennan?
Yes.
Representative Bolden?
Yes.
Representative Bradley?
Yes.
Representative Murphy?
Yes.
Representative Newman?
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Newell?
Yes.
Representative Salick?
Yes.
Representative Schultz?
Yes.
Chairman Roy?
Chair votes yes.
20-0.
Motion about to pass carries by unanimous 20-0. Any objection to consent? Seeing none, the bill will go on the consent calendar. I hereby close the executive session on SB 14. I hereby open the executive session on SB 15. I make a motion of ought to pass. Seconded by Representative Gathright again. Representative Prue, you're a little slow on that one. I will speak to my motion. Everything I said previously still applies. If not, it's not as onerous. A tree stand isn't as onerous as something capturing pictures of you, but nonetheless, it is your property. It can damage your trees, and it can be disconcerting to walk through your woods and see a structure there. And I do believe that, as well as continuing to allow hunters access to land, these permission things will foster conversations and relationships between landowners and good hunters. And that's what we want, is the good hunters. And if you're not a good hunter and you're not interested in talking to landowners, maybe you ought to find another sport. Would you like to speak to your second, Representative Gathright?
I think it's well said by you.
Discussion. Representative Salick.
Will using one of these stands allow me to find the marshmallow peeps after the Easter season?
I do believe it will, but you do need landowner permission. Seeing no further discussion, I would ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor for SB 15 is ought to pass.
Representative Lynn?
Yes.
Representative Pratt?
Yes.
Representative Sytek?
Yes.
Representative Prue?
You betcha.
Representative Janfrin?
Yes.
Representative Mannion?
Yes.
Representative Reed?
Yes.
Representative Stone?
Yes.
Representative Tenzar?
Yes.
Representative Harriet Gathright?
Yes.
Representative Brennan?
Yes.
Representative Bolden?
Yes.
Representative Bradley?
Yes.
Representative Murphy?
Yes.
Representative Newman?
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Newell?
Yes.
Representative Salick?
Yes.
Representative Schultz?
Yes.
Chairman Roy?
Chair votes yes.
Motion is unanimous, 20-0.
Motion about to pass carries by unanimous vote. Any objection to consent? Seeing none, it will go on the consent calendar. I hereby close the executive session on SB 15. And we are finished our business for today. I'm not going to say a darn thing about coming back here again. Just watch your emails. Enjoy your weekend. Actually,